Well, inner criticism is such a common experience because inner criticism is in part connected to societal values, and people are always growing outside societal values or pushing the borders of society. So as a result, we're all filled with tons of inner criticisms because most of us in our deepest dreaming don't always meet the standards of what our societies, our cultures, or our family environments want. And we don't have a lot of support when we get to those borders and we find ourselves doing new things or surprising things. So often they're first met with a cultural view, which is to say no to ourselves, instead of having a really expansive and open view to whatever comes up, which in my view is one of the gifts that process work brings. Process work says yes. Process work says, oh wow, something interesting is bubbling up inside of you. What is it? Curious. Instead of saying, no, that doesn't fit. Process work is interested in the disturbance, is interested in the places where things don't fit, where there's conflict and trouble and magic and beauty and radical things. So we all have inner criticism as a result. It's part of the growth process. So just understanding that, I think, is really important. And then how one works with inner criticism is really different. Like some inner critics are really just generally downing, and they just come with the attitude of hatred towards you. And those inner critics need to be valued, and often those inner critics are even wanting us to meet them with the intensity of their power. When you work with inner critics, it's important to wring them out. I often think of a wet dish rag. You got to wring them out and find out. Don't let an inner critic just get away with a general criticism. You think I'm a sucky therapist? Why am I a sucky therapist? You think I'm a bad person in a relationship? Why? Be specific. Get all the juice out of the inner critic. In other words, actually challenge and take over the criticism of a critic. Most critics are insufficiently critical, actually. They're too much at the surface, and they don't give you anything concrete that you can learn from. So another path in working with an inner critic is really trying to find out what is the essence of what they're saying. Sometimes they have useful information. Sometimes inner critics have a lot of feeling and passion for you, and they're just bringing it out in a terrible way. For example, sometimes the root of an inner critic is actually that they love you, but they're showing it in a terrible way, potentially just like your parents did, for example. So getting down to the root of what they're critical about is also extremely important. So that's another way of dealing with an inner critic. Another way of dealing with it is picking up the energy of the critic. Sometimes you'll see a person in their identity is more adapted, or kind of shy or reserved or something. And a critic maybe has a very pointed energy, and that pointed, direct energy is something potentially that the person needs. Not the nastiness that the critic brings, but that kind of pointed energy. So there's a few different ideas.